The verdict is read. The courtroom empties. The cameras turn off. But for the person being sentenced, this is not the end of the story. It's the moment the prison system truly takes control. Within hours, sometimes minutes, an invisible process begins. Paperwork moves faster than people. Decisions are made in offices the inmate will never see. Classification codes are assigned. Destinations are chosen, often without explanation, appeal, or warning. Some inmates are sent hundreds of miles away. Some disappear into intake centers. Some are flagged for isolation, long-term confinement, or high-control units before they've ever stepped inside a permanent prison. This documentary reveals what really happens after the verdict, where inmates are sent, how the system decides, and why this hidden phase determines everything that comes next. The moment control is transferred the moment the judge finishes reading the sentence, something fundamental changes. Legally, the case is over. Emotionally, the courtroom moves on. But administratively, a far more powerful system takes over, one that operates almost entirely out of public view. From this point forward, the inmate is no longer managed by the court. They are transferred into the custody of a corrections system designed around classification, control, and long-term containment. This transition doesn't happen days later. It begins immediately. In many jurisdictions, inmates are not even returned to county jail, where they were held before trial. Instead, they are processed directly for transfer. Handcuffs are replaced. Restraint protocols change. New identification numbers are issued. The inmate's identity shifts from a name to a classification profile. This is the first stage where choice disappears entirely. From person TO profile after sentencing, an inmate is reduced to a set of data points: age, criminal history, sentence length, prior behavior in custody, gang affiliations, mental health flags, medical needs, risk assessments. Each of these factors feeds into a classification algorithm or review process. While officials often describe this as neutral and procedural, the reality is more complex. These early classifications can permanently shape where an inmate lives, how they are treated, and whether they will ever be eligible for lower security placement. One decision made during this phase can lock someone into a high-security environment for years. What's most important to understand is this: the inmate is not present for most of these decisions. They don't attend classification meetings. They don't see the reports written about them. They often don't even know why a certain label was applied. Temporary holding. The first disappearance before any permanent placement. Most inmates are sent to a temporary intake or reception facility. These facilities are rarely discussed publicly, yet they are a crucial part of the system. Intake centers are not designed for rehabilitation. They are designed for processing. Inmates can spend weeks or even months here, often under strict movement controls. Communication is limited. Visitation is restricted. Personal property may be withheld. Phone access is inconsistent. For families on the outside, this is often the first moment when someone seems to disappear. Calls stop coming. Mail is delayed or returned. Online inmate locators may not update for days or weeks. This is not a mistake. It is how the system is structured. Why the system moves in silence. Corrections agencies justify the secrecy as a matter of security. Movement schedules, transfer locations, and intake procedures are considered sensitive information. From an administrative standpoint, this reduces escape risk and prevents interference. But from the inmate's perspective, it creates total uncertainty. They don't know where they're going. They don't know how long they will stay. They don't know what level of security they are being marked for. For many inmates, this uncertainty is more psychologically destabilizing than confinement itself. Studies and first-hand accounts consistently show that lack of information increases anxiety, stress, and compliance through fear. Silence becomes a control mechanism. County jail versus state or federal custody. Another critical shift happens at this stage: the transition from local custody to a large, centralized system. County jails are designed for short-term detention. State and federal systems are designed for long-term management. This means stricter rules, standardized routines, and far less flexibility. In county jail, inmates may interact daily with staff, attorneys, or family members. Once transferred into state or federal custody, Those interactions become rare and regulated. The system does not adapt to the inmate. The inmate is expected to adapt instantly to the system. Those who fail to do so are flagged early. Early flags that follow for years' behavior during this first phase is heavily monitored. Even minor incidents, arguing with staff, refusing an order, showing signs of distress, can be recorded and used later to justify harsher placement. An inmate who reacts emotionally after sentencing may be labeled unstable. An inmate who asks too many questions may be labeled noncompliant. An inmate who withdraws may be labeled a management risk. These labels are difficult to remove once applied. They follow inmates through transfers, reviews, and hearings. In some cases, they directly lead to placement in high security or isolation units later in the sentence. The end of the courtroom story. This is the point where most public narratives stop. News coverage ends at the verdict. True crime stories move on to the next case. The system that takes over afterward is rarely examined in detail. But for the inmate, this is where the real sentence begins. Not just time behind bars, but placement, control, restriction, and a long process of being absorbed into a system designed to operate without transparency. And this is only the first step. How the system decides where you go once an inmate enters a correctional system, the most important decision, is made quietly and quickly, where they will be sent next. This decision is not based on a single factor, and it is rarely explained to the person it affects. Instead, it is a result of a layered classification process designed to sort people into environments the system believes it can control. At the center of this process is classification scoring. Every inmate is evaluated using a combination of static and dynamic factors. Static factors include the offense type, sentence length, prior convictions, and age. These elements cannot change. Dynamic factors include behavior during detention, mental health evaluations, medical needs, and any incidents recorded since arrest. Together, these details form a risk profile that follows the inmate through their entire sentence. What makes the system powerful is not just what it measures, but how little room it leaves for correction. Once a classification level is assigned, it becomes a default assumption for future placements. An inmate marked as high risk early on will often remain high risk, even without serious disciplinary history. Most inmates never see their full classification file. They may be told a security level, but not the reasoning behind it. Appeals are limited, slow, and rarely successful. The system prioritizes efficiency and containment over transparency. Geography also plays a role. Bed availability, overcrowding, and institutional needs can override personal circumstances. An inmate may be sent hundreds or even thousands of miles away from family, simply because a facility has space. Proximity to home is not a priority. Logistical balance is. Mental health flags weigh heavily in this stage. Inmates identified as emotionally unstable, depressed, or resistant to authority are often routed toward facilities with stricter controls. Ironically, these are the same environments most likely to worsen those conditions. The system does not ask what setting is best for recovery. It asks what setting is easiest to manage. There is also a category that rarely gets discussed publicly: administrative risk. These are inmates who are not necessarily violent but are considered disruptive, influential, or difficult to manage. They may have filed grievances, attracted media attention, or challenged authority in the past. Administrative risk can be enough to justify placement in higher security environments. Once this process is complete, the decision is final. Transfer orders are issued. Transportation is scheduled. The inmate is informed shortly before movement, sometimes with only hours of notice. There is no hearing, no courtroom, no public record. This is the moment the system locks in the path forward. Where an inmate is sent now will shape their daily life, their mental state, their access to programs, and in many cases, their chances of ever leaving a high-security environment. And once that path is chosen, it becomes very difficult to escape. The transfer that erases your identity once a transfer order is issued, the inmate stops being treated as a personal location and becomes a movement item in the system. From this point on, the priority is not comfort, clarity, or dignity. It is control, timing, and containment. Transfers usually happen without warning. In many cases, inmates are told the night before or the morning of the move. Personal belongings are limited to what can be carried. Legal paperwork may be boxed separately. Property often arrives weeks later, if at all. What matters most is that the inmate is moved quickly and quietly. Restraints are standard. Handcuffs, waist chains, and leg irons are applied depending on classification level. Even nonviolent inmates may be fully restrained if they are part of a group transfer. This is not based on individual behavior, but on protocol. Once movement begins, individuality disappears. Transportation itself is deliberately disorienting. Inmates may be moved by bus, van, or plane, often with multiple stops along the way. Routes are not shared. Windows may be blocked. Time is difficult to track. Some transfers take days, with inmates sleeping in temporary holding cells at unfamiliar facilities. Others are completed in silence, with no explanation of distance or destination. During transfer, communication is almost completely cut off. Phone access is suspended. Family members are not notified. Attorneys may not know where their client is for extended periods. This gap creates a legal and emotional vacuum where inmates effectively vanish from public view. The system refers to this as secure movement. In practice, it functions as a temporary erasure of identity. Names are replaced with numbers. Destinations are hidden. Responsibility is passed from one agency to another. If something goes wrong, accountability becomes difficult to trace. Medical and mental health needs often receive minimal attention during transit. Medications may be delayed or altered. Sleep is limited. Stress is constant. For inmates with anxiety disorders or chronic conditions, the transfer itself can be more damaging than the facility they're being sent to. By the time an inmate reaches their destination, they are physically exhausted, mentally disoriented, and fully dependent on the receiving institution. This is not accidental. Transfers are designed to reset power dynamics. When inmates arrive confused and depleted, compliance comes easier. This stage marks a turning point. Once transferred, previous routines no longer apply. Previous relationships with staff are gone. The inmate must relearn rules, schedules, and expectations from scratch. The system has completed its first full assertion of control. Arrival into a system that does not adapt arrival at a new facility is not a welcome, it is an assessment. The inmate steps off transport into an environment already designed to limit movement, speech, and resistance. There is no orientation in the traditional sense. There is only intake. The first hours are focused on control. Strip searches are conducted. Property is inventoried. Identification photos are retaken. Medical and mental health screenings are brief and procedural, often reduced to checklists rather than conversations. The goal is not to understand the inmate, but to place them quickly into an existing structure. During intake, previous classifications are reviewed, not questioned. The receiving facility operates on the assumption that earlier decisions were correct. Challenging them is rare and discouraged. Any attempt by the inmate to explain, protest, or ask for reconsideration is often interpreted as resistance. Housing assignments are made based on availability, security level, and internal management needs. This can mean immediate placement into general population or direct placement into restrictive housing. In some cases, inmates are placed into isolation temporarily while staff observe behavior. These observation periods can last days or weeks with minimal explanation. Information remains tightly controlled. Inmates may not be told how long intake will last. They may not know when they will receive personal property. They may not have immediate access to phone calls or commissary. This uncertainty reinforces dependence on staff and compliance with rules. For many inmates, this is the first moment they understand the true scale of the system. Unlike county jail, where faces are familiar and routines are flexible, large prison facilities operate like closed machines. Schedules are fixed. Movement is synchronized. Deviations are punished. Staff interactions are formal and distant. Officers rotate. Case managers change. There is no consistent authority figure to appeal to. Decisions are made through paperwork, not conversation. Mental health strain often spikes during this phase. The combination of transfer stress, sensory overload, and lack of information can trigger anxiety, depression, or withdrawal. Requests for help may be delayed or denied, especially if the inmate has already been flagged as difficult or high risk. By the end of intake, the inmate is no longer in transition. They are assigned, housed, and absorbed into the institution's daily rhythm. From this point forward, movement becomes rare, tightly regulated, and slow. The system does not adjust itself to the person inside it. The person is expected to adjust or suffer the consequences. How early decisions lock in your future by the time an inmate settles into daily life at a permanent facility. Most of the most important decisions have already been made. Where they live, how they are supervised, and what opportunities they will have going forward are largely determined by the classifications and records created in the earliest stages after sentencing. What makes this stage especially powerful is that the system treats early assessments as predictive facts, not temporary judgments. An inmate flagged as high risk during intake is assumed to remain high risk. A person placed into restrictive housing early is often viewed as someone who belongs there. Even when behavior improves, the original label continues to influence reviews and recommendations. This is how inmates become trapped in long-term confinement paths. Program access is one of the first casualties. Many educational, work, and rehabilitation programs are restricted to inmates with lower security classifications. Those placed in higher control units may wait years before becoming eligible, if they ever do. Without program participation, parole boards and review committees see little evidence of progress, reinforcing the decision to keep the inmate where they are. Housing reviews exist, but they move slowly and rely heavily on written reports. These reports are usually authored by staff who have limited interaction with the inmate. A single negative entry can outweigh months of compliant behavior. Silence, compliance, and isolation rarely generate positive documentation. Transfers out of high-security environments are possible but uncommon. The system prioritizes stability over reassessment. Moving an inmate requires paperwork, approvals, and available space elsewhere. Keeping them where they are is easier, safer, and less visible. Over time, inmates begin to understand an unspoken rule. Your first placement defines you. Many stop requesting reviews. Others become resigned to their situation. Some react with frustration, which only confirms the system's original assumptions. This feedback loop is one of the most effective control mechanisms in modern corrections. It does not rely on constant punishment. It relies on paperwork delays and quiet denials. By the time years have passed, the inmate is no longer just serving a sentence. They are serving the consequences of decisions made when they had the least information, the least power, and the least ability to advocate for themselves. The verdict may have ended in the courtroom, but the real sentence was shaped long before this point. And once the system locks you into a path, getting out of it becomes one of the hardest battles you will ever fight. What happens after the story ends when the verdict is read? Most people believe the story is over. The crime has been judged. Justice has been delivered. The sentence has been announced. But as you've seen in this documentary, that moment is only the beginning of a much larger and largely invisible process. After the courtroom clears, the prison system takes full control. Decisions are made quietly. Classifications are assigned without explanation. Transfers happen without warning. And early labels follow inmates for years, shaping where they live, how they are treated, and whether they ever have a real chance to move forward. This is not a system built around second chances. It is a system built around efficiency, containment, and risk management. Once an inmate is placed on a certain path, changing that path becomes slow, difficult, and often impossible. Paperwork replaces people. Silence replaces accountability. And time does the rest. Understanding what happens after the verdict matters, because this hidden phase affects thousands of lives every year. Not just inmates, but families waiting for phone calls, attorneys trying to track clients, and communities that rarely see what happens beyond the prison gates. The courtroom may decide guilt, but the prison system decides everything else. If you found this documentary informative, make sure to stay connected for more fully researched, factual prison documentaries that reveal what the system rarely shows. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary.